Okay. Okay, we're gonna call our meeting to order. The first thing is the roll call. Wynant.
Here.
Waller.
Here.
Wageman.
Here.
Bradley.
Here.
Pat Reiner here, all present. Okay, next thing is to set the agenda. Is there any changes to the agenda today?
President Reiner, staff would like to add a new item for discussion and information.
Okay.
Make it item number 2, which would be the Zelensky enforcement.
Anything else? Anybody else?
Well, that stops pretty quick. Hold on.
All right, we'll need a motion.
Madam President, I move to approve the agenda with the addition of the Slinsky update for items for discussion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Wynant,
Yes.
Waller,
Yes.
Wageman,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Reiner, yes, motion passes. Next thing is approval of the minutes.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the June 7th, 2021 workshop.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Now it'll be a roll call. Wynant,
Yes.
Waller,
Yes.
Wageman,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Reiner, yes, motion passes.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the June 9th, 2021 regular meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call a roll call. Wynant,
Yes.
Waller,
Yes.
Wageman,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Reiner, yes, motion passes. Okay,
And Madam Chair, I move approval of the June 9th, 2021 public hearing on the reestablishment and correction of drainage system records for Anoka County Ditch 102232.
Second.
motion made and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll have a roll call. Wynant,
Yes.
Waller,
Yes.
Wageman,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Reiner, yes, the motion passes. Okay, consent agenda. Anybody have any questions on the consent agenda today? Any questions from the board? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam President, I move to Half Rock Permit 21-026, 21-040, in accordance with the district engineer's findings and recommendations as contained in the engineer's findings and recommendation, or as contained in the engineer's report dated June 15th, 2021.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, call the vote. Wynant,
Yes.
Waller,
Yes.
Wageman,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Reiner, yes, motion passes. Okay. Now we're gonna go to the public. Do I have to recess for this?
President Reiner, it's just noticing that John Cole is not present.
We beat him to the check.
What's
This
that?
is a split. Split.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
I'm not gonna do that, yeah.
So President Reiner, the next item is the slip. And no, you don't have to recess.
We don't have to recess. Okay, so the next item is a SWIP and we'll go to the Rice Creek Watershed District Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program. The purpose of the meeting is to provide information to and receive input from the public regarding the district stormwater pollution prevention program. First, we'll have District Sampaio to give us a brief presentation. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, President Reiner and Board of Managers, for having me today to hold a public information meeting on the Rice Creek Watershed District Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program. I'm going to share my screen here in a moment. Let's see if I can find it. And then let me know too if you can't see it.
It's there.
All right, thank you. So every year we're required to have a public information meeting on our SWIP under the MS4 permit. The MS4 permit is a federally mandated permit by the US EPA or Environmental Protection Agency that is administered locally in Minnesota by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. It authorizes stormwater discharge from our MS4, which in our case is currently the public drainage system to waters of the state. The MS4 permit is designed to reduce the amount of sediment and pollutants that enter surface and groundwater from storm sewer systems as much as possible. As part of this permit, we are required to develop a SWIP that incorporates best management practices. The current MS4 permit became effective on November 16th of 2020. As part of the permit reissuance process, the district completed a two-part application for continued coverage under the new permit, which included updating the district's SWIP. The district also proactively revised Rule C stormwater management to align with the 2020 MS4 permit public linear water quality treatment standards. The MPCA reviewed the district's application for completeness and recently determined that it is complete. So one of the next steps is for the MPCA to place a district SWIP on a 30-day public notice period, and they will follow up with the remaining steps to receive coverage under the new permit. So here's a map of our current coverage area under the MS4 permit. We are a non-traditional MS4 in that our MS4 is considered to be the public drainage system only within the urbanized areas of the district as determined by the decennial census. We are only required to report on those urban areas, which are shaded in pink on the map. There may be future changes to the district's coverage area depending on the 2020 census. The Census Bureau expects this information to be available to the states in August and to the general public in September. And there also may be changes depending on the outcome of discussions that staff is having currently with the MPCA on our MS4 boundary. The MS4 permit requires us to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan or SWIP that addresses 6 minimum control measures. The SWIP determines our strategies and best management practices for each of the 6 minimum control measures, which are public education and outreach, public outreach and education, public participation, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management, and pollution prevention and good housekeeping. All staff at the district help implement BMPs to meet the MS4 permit requirements. It's a team effort here. The next few slides are highlights from our SWIP and 2020 MS4 annual report, which is on page 34 in your packets, and shows how we've addressed the 6 minimum control measures. The first one is, again, public education and outreach. In 2020, we continued to write several community newspaper and newsletter articles for communities in our district, and we created targeted materials for specific groups like utility bill inserts. We did see a decrease in the use of our website and Facebook page, likely due to the pandemic. For example, in 2019, 23,000 people used our website and only 14,751 used it in 2020. Our future website update may help to increase the public's usage of our website and ensure that it's meeting their needs. We also transitioned to hosting virtual workshops and provided financial support and assistance to district partners who were also transitioning events to virtual platforms. Despite the pandemic, there were many Blue Thumb and Lawns to Legumes virtual workshops, turf alternative workshops, and smart salting and winter maintenance virtual workshops that had good attendance. We also provided our CAC a virtual watershed tour that was made available to the board and to the public. We virtually participated in the Children's Water Festival, and we also co-hosted a webinar on actions that residents can take to improve water quality. We address the public education and outreach minimum control measure through several other programs and efforts, such as our water quality grant program and mini grant programs. 14 water quality grant projects and 21 mini grant projects were approved in 2020, which are both up by 1 from 2019. Staff have seen a significant increase in interest in both of these programs during this pandemic. We also participated in collaborative education programs and provided resources to our partners through several avenues, like Blue Thumb and Minnesota Water Steward programs, and the Adopt a Drain program. There is significant participation in the Adopt a Drain program, which had 167 new participants in 2020 who adopted 272 storm drains to help protect our waters in our district. Overall, through the public education and outreach minimum control measure, we continue to coordinate communications and consistency of messaging with our partners to increase the effectiveness of our efforts and to provide our partners the support that they may need. For the second minimum control measure, public participation, we hold an annual SWIP public information meeting, as we're having now, to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on our SWIP. We have not yet received written or verbal comments related to our SWIP prior to this meeting, but we will likely have comments during the MPCA's 30-day public notice period in the near future. The third minimum control measure is illicit discharge detection and elimination. We are again unique since our current MS4 boundary only includes the public drainage system in urban areas. So illicit discharge in our MS4 is therefore not typical. It would likely come from an outfall on the ditch system rather than a storm drain like with a city MS4. To prevent illicit discharge, we regulate land disturbances near our ditches through the implementation and enforcement of district rules, and we monitor the water quality of our ditches during regular inspections. If we receive a complaint of a known or suspected illicit discharge, we immediately investigate the illicit discharge following our illicit discharge enforcement response procedures. All field staff at the district are trained in illicit discharge identification and district procedures. Staff did not identify any illicit discharges in 2020. The fourth minimum control measure is construction site stormwater runoff control. We actively implement and enforce controls through our district rules, and we follow our construction site inspection enforcement response procedures for any violations. In 2020, there were 84 active construction sites that were greater than 1 acre. We also completed 389 site inspections for sites greater than 1 acre and sent out 118 violation notices, most of which were through inspection reports. And 5 of the notices were 10-day work without a permit notices or enforcement letter notices. On the whole, our numbers for 2020 are a bit lower than in 2019 due to the pandemic. The fifth minimum control measure is post-construction stormwater management and new development and redevelopment. We actively implement and enforce this control measure through our permit review and inspection processes, especially through Rule C stormwater management. We've also required ditch and drainage and utility easements for some projects and require stormwater operation and maintenance agreements for required stormwater treatment BMPs. In 2020, we reviewed about 57 projects that required permanent stormwater treatment BMPs, which is down by 10 from 2019. And as part of the newly reissued MS4 permit, in 2021, we will need to map these structural stormwater BMPs through our permit program, which we'll be able to do through the new MS4 front database. The sixth minimum control measure is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. This measure is regarding how we maintain our MS4 to prevent pollutant reduction or to reduce pollutant discharges. We meet this through our routine inspection and maintenance of the public drainage system and annual inspection of district-owned facilities. In 2020, we completed at least 1 inspection of all district-owned facilities that are applicable to the MS4 permit and outfalls within our MS4. Lastly, in addition to the minimum control measures, as part of the MS4 annual report and SWIP, we also report on discharges to impaired waters with an approved total maximum daily load, or TMDL. We have designated categorical waste load allocations for the Hardwood Creek TMDL and the Golden Lake TMDL, and are required to report on any completed activities that would help meet these allocations. Hardwood Creek is impaired for biota, dissolved oxygen, and total suspended solids, and Golden Lake is impaired for excess nutrients. After the MS4 permit was reissued last November, one TMDL was added to the list that the district is required to report on during this new permit cycle, which will be documented in the 2021 MS4 annual report. The added TMDL is the Southwest Urban Lakes TMDL, which includes Eastmore Lake, Island Lake, Little Johanna Lake, Long Lake, Pike Lake, and Valentine Lake. Available for any questions or comments.
Any questions from the board, Laura? Go ahead, Mike.
Just an informational one for me, on page 47 of our packet is question 60. And you enter the total number of structural stormwater BMPs, outfalls, excluding underground outfalls and ponds within your MS4. And that we only have one pond. I was surprised that we only have one pond. That pond is in whatever we've got a storm system that we've dug out. Here, talk to me about one pond.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I believe it's one off of 61. Let me see if I can pull that up really quickly.
Where's the one that goes into Bald Eagle?
I think so. Let me see if I can pull that up. So I know we included it in the Bowser annual report. Because something new that we've been doing to help with the documentation of our compliance with the MS4 permit is this year we started adding in some of the information into the Bowser annual report that we have to complete so that we have some place central for everyone to input information related to the MS4 permit, which is great that we can do that. Let me see here. I can pull it up really fast. So I believe it's off 61. Okay, here we go. Yep, it is Ramsey Washington Judicial Ditch 1 and Highway 61 Treatment Pond.
Why would the Hanson Park Pond, for example, also be in there?
Let's see here.
Madam President, Manager Bradley. So the Hanson Park Pond was something that was constructed by the city of Roseville back in the 60s. And so the pond itself is not a district facility, but the iron hand sand filter system and I would have to go back and look at our district facilities, but there are components of that project we constructed that are the district facilities, but not the whole pond itself. And there's a couple of ponds a couple of facilities like that in the district, like the Long Lake Sediment Basin and the Lock Lake Sediment Basin. Both of those are identified as district facilities, but it's just the sediment basin themselves that is the facility and not the larger pond area itself.
It's the city of New Brighton.
City.
I'm sorry. Yes,
City of New Brighton and the city of Fridley are the owners of the larger facility then, or?
The Hanson Park is located in the city of New Brighton. Mr. Otter has noted Roseville, but it's, yeah. But I see Kyle came on if he has something.
What about Long Lake? And my question is, who owns those? I know that it's a district facility and the district has responsibility for cleaning it, but I was wondering who actually is the fee title owner of that property?
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, I could jump in on that. And in the case of Hanson Park, the city of New Brighton would be the fee owner of the property contained within the park, which includes the pond. The southern basin of that pond is established as a sediment basin that we are responsible for. So that's the facility, as Chris was alluding to. And I think, some of those facilities are considered to be sediment basins officially, as opposed to just a stormwater pond. In the case of the Long Lake sediment basin, that facility is located within a public water. I don't know that there is a parcel there. So it's kind of part of the creek. I don't I'd have to look at a parcel map, but
I believe it's the Ramsey County Parks that owns the property at that
could be.
area.
So I see the question says to include ponds within your MS4, exclude privately owned. I don't, but everything you've described to me is publicly owned. I don't know. But then again, I didn't write the question, so.
Madam President, is that the same, Fridley, and Lock Lake, is that, owned by the Fridley Park System?
That, we would have to look at a parcel map to know for sure. But the water on top is a public
Yeah.
water, similar to what.
Part of the creek.
Right, yep.
Sure, it doesn't really matter in the long run. I think it's just found it odd.
Yeah, but we do have the responsibility for maintaining it. That's-
So it's
Yeah.
within our district. They're publicly owned and we're responsible. So I would have thought we would have included them, but we've been doing this, I'm sure, for 20 years.
So,
I'm done.
Madam President,
If I-
Manager Bradley, in answer to your question of the, and Lauren, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the way these questions are set up was with the mind of a municipality being the MS4 permittee. And so when they look at that, then they, automatically think of the municipality, if there is a publicly owned pond, the municipality being the owner of it. But in this case, if we have a publicly owned pond, it's actually rare that the district, again, only one case, the district actually owns the proper or constructed the pond itself. And in each case, the ponds are owned by a public entity other than the district. And so it's not really the permittee that has that responsibility.
Right. And then President Priner, Board of Managers, part of our conversations with the MPCA that we're having right now are related to both district facilities and our ditch system, which parts are actually part of the MS4 permit and which aren't, what should be part of our boundary. We told them that we asked for clarification from them because currently some of our ditches are considered a conveyance under the MS4 permit, but they're also classified as impaired, subject to standards and assessments as a water of the state. And we see those as being conflicting, having them both be an MS4 and water of the state. And the MPCA agreed and stated that they can't be both. And so we're working with them right now on figuring that out and getting some clarification. They have to determine a policy position, and we're hoping to hear from them on that later this summer.
Madam President, thank you, Gloria. That's very interesting to hear that. I realize that that's been a problem in the past, that we've been impaired for those little critters and some of these things, lack of oxygen, et cetera. And it'd be good to have it straightened out. I only have one request in the future, so that when the packet comes out, that wonderful map that you had on the screen, I'd like to see a copy of that in the packet with the questions, because I think that helps everybody, particularly me, because I'm a little slower than others here, to understand where this is located at. And so that's all I'd ask, and in the future we have a map.
Sure, Manager Waller, I can definitely include that in the packet in the future.
She'd beat us all on a 100-yard dash.
Okay,
No, maybe 10 miles.
so
but
let's go back to the purpose of the meeting is to receive comments and questions from the interested party regarding the SWIP. During public comment, managers are welcome to ask questions of commenters to clarify their remarks. District Technician San Pedro is available to respond to questions and comments. I just ask anybody that is going to respond in the microphone to please give his or her name, address, and affiliation for the record. And that the district will consider all input and will make changes to SWIP as appropriate. So this time, if there is anybody out there who'd like to comment on this public information meeting, please open your mics and say who you are for the record and make any comments you wish to make. Anybody out there? Nobody out there that wants to comment. So I am satisfied that everybody wanting to make a comment has done so, and we'll close the public information and continue in our regular meeting.
Madam President, they still have some days, or 30 days or so, don't they have to comment on my writing?
What is the comment period? Is it?
There is, Manager Waller, Board of Managers, there is an upcoming 30-day public notice period as part of the MPCA's process in renewing our coverage under the new MS4 permit. So they will have another opportunity to provide comments. And then they can always, if there is someone who has a comment, they can always submit comments anytime during the year as well, through email or phone call.
Okay, after closing that, we're gonna go to open mic. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to comment on anything today that isn't on the agenda?
Madam President,
Go ahead.
there's a proposed motion. Want that?
Yes. Page 32. Sure. Yep, let's do that.
Madam President, I move we accept the 2020 MS4 annual report and direct the administrator to submit the report to the MPCA.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hope we have a roll call. Manager Wynant,
Yes.
Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Wageman,
Yes.
Manager Bradley,
Yes.
and Manager Franner, yes. Thank you for catching that.
Thank
Mike.
you.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, and we're back to open mic. Is there anybody there that would like to make any comments? Hearing none, we're gonna go to items requiring board action.
President Priner, the next item on the agenda is the Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1 Records Reestablishment. Previously, you held the public hearing and recessed the meeting, so you will have to reconvene the meeting.
Okay,
I note that John Cole had joined the call.
okay, with that, we're gonna reconvene our meeting for the drainage system record for Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1 reestablishment.
So, President Priner, I see Ashley has joined us to share with you a bit about the resolution.
Thank you. Ashley?
Morning, Madam President, Board of Managers. As Nick mentioned, we have the Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1 public hearing was recessed to the meeting. Before you, we have Resolution 2021-10 for the findings in order to reestablish and correct the drainage system record for Ramsey, Washington Judicial Ditch 1. The resolution incorporated the comments we received and are addressed. Yeah, if you guys have any questions.
Any questions for Ashley?
Madam President,
Go ahead.
on page 57, which is 5 of 6 of the report, the top line says there are currently no plans or requests for any major construction on RWJD 1. Did that mean to say major repair on RWJD 1?
Madam President, it's John Cole. We certainly could amend it to say that. I think that the question that was posed to the board during the public hearing was phrased more broadly than simply repair. And so we were just trying to address it in terms of the answer that was provided by the engineers at the hearing.
Thank you.
Anything else? If not, I'll entertain a motion so we can have the discussion.
Madam President, I'll move a resolution 2021-10. Findings and order reestablishing and correcting the drainage record for Ramsey/Washington Judicial Ditch 1 under statutes 103B.101 subdivision 4A.4A.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion regarding this?
All right, Madam President, just that I would note that while this is a records report that in the future, when we do this, then it's not on the schedule for a long time. But any kind of culvert replacement that's done in between, we want to see if we can do something about having those rectangular culverts or box culverts as they're called. You remember we had some comments on the very first meeting we had from folks that were up on the Washington County area that were worried about the outlet structure for Pine Tree Lake. And those are all items that in the future should have an examination and consideration.
Any other comments? Now we'll call the vote. Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Wyman?
Yes.
Manager Bradley?
Yes.
Manager Wakeman?
Yes.
And Manager Reiner, yes, motion passes. Okay, go ahead, Ashley, number 2.
You should reconvene the.
Oh, we gotta reconvene our regular meeting.
Yes.
Okay, now we can go.
Now we have to have another hearing.
You're going to pull the other ACD 1022 out of recess now.
Okay, so we're going,
They're separate public processes. So
okay, so now you want a motion to,
I would like you to reconvene ACD 1022 public hearing.
okay, so we will reconvene ACD 1022-32 public hearing. Ashley, go ahead.
All right. We have resolution 2021-11 for the findings and order reestablishing and correcting the drainage system record for Anoka County ditch 1022-32. We previously held the public hearing, and the resolution incorporates the past work that was done as well as what was currently discussed and found in the engineer's report. Any questions, I guess?
Go ahead.
President Reiner, I'll just share that the board directed that we complete in order, the draft order to put before you, as Ashley just shared. I know I've received a number of questions or clarifications from Mr. Otterness. I think if you'd like,
To follow through on this.
yeah, some discussion on it. And maybe Mr. Cole will guide if we need a motion before that in order to discuss it, or how that might be best handled.
Madam President, it's John,
Mhm.
your motion continuing this was for the purpose of the preparation of the findings and the order. And you were, in your motion, it was that you were going to discuss the potential adoption of said findings and order. So I think you are open to further deliberation by the board based on your prior motion continuing the hearing for this purpose.
So, Madam President, does it require that we have a motion here for the resolution here in order to discuss this?
That was I think you said no.
He said no.
All
You
right,
said no.
so,
Okay, so let's go ahead with some discussion. I believe Chris had some questions and answers to.
Yeah,
They did
President
come
Reiner, if I could, board managers, Chris and I had discussed this a number of times. We know the area near Joe Durrell Street was one that drew some attention. I did, for the record, communicate with the city, Elizabeth Mersko, the administrator, letting her know that we were having this today. Chris had compiled a little bit of a document to share with me, at least clarity. I think it would be good for the board to see what he put together, and maybe that's helpful in your deliberations.
Okay. Chris, go ahead.
Sure, Madam President, I will share my screen here now. I put this information into the form of a PowerPoint just to make it a little bit easier. But really what what I wanted to show you and go over with you is, let me swap screens here.
President Reiner, it's Chris. Yeah, Chris, use of your cursor or any zooming would be helpful.
Sure. And let me know if you can see my cursor on the screen. I know it's kind of faint with the white background here, but I'll try to describe where I'm pointing
I
to.
did see, yep.
I'll just note that what I have shown on the screen here is the profile that we had in our report, and this is actually two different pages. We essentially stitched the two pages together because they happen to and on each side near Joe Durrell Street. And so in order to get the full picture of how we arrived at our profile specifically near Joe Durrell Street, which is the area I believe that Perry Wagaman had the most concern about, we just wanted to go over what our rationale was. And so just so you're aware, the solid line that we have shown on here, that I'll move my cursor along, this solid line is that as constructed, subsequently improved condition that we determined from our report. The dashed line on here is the current channel bottom that was surveyed in October last year. And this current channel bottom essentially is where the district's contractor out there for this area, and that was Scandia Trucking, Roger Ideen, where he had dug to the bottom or hard pan of the ditch. And again, you know, when he's out there doing his excavation, he feels around with his excavator, feels down till where he hits basically a sand bottom, and that's where he excavated to. And that is where the dashed line is on the map here. And so what we did in October as we were surveying this, we also did some borings and or probings along the bottom to confirm whether there was any sediment accumulated or built up in any of these locations where we surveyed. And as you can see, these borings, and these are these black and white special looking dots that are in the map here, 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 and here. Those all coincided very closely with the surveyed channel bottom, meaning there was very little accumulated sediment. And what we found is essentially that when Roger completed his work, he did in fact dig down to that hard pan elevation, the elevation of the native sand bottom, and that there's been very little accumulation in these areas since. So I'll move on here and show what we would look at if we were determining the original channel bottom and we wanted to just go basically dot to dot from each one of these soil borings, what that would look like. And what I'm trying to get at with this discussion is noting that we use multiple pieces of data when we're putting together our determination that as constructed condition, and not just one means of evidence. So if we looked at just the borings as our sole means of evidence, this is what it would look like. You'd have this purple dashed line here. And again, generally water flows from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. In this area, that would be west of Jodrell, and Jodrell is located right here. This is the culvert location on Jodrell. If we look at that area specifically, west of Jodrell Street, there would be negative slope here. Essentially, water would have to flow uphill in this area if we used just the borings as our sole determiner for the original channel bottom. And again, you know, it's in our understanding, looking at that was unlikely to have been the original channel excavation, that it's unlikely they would have put a negative slope into the system there. Likewise, I'll note that if you go just to the east of Jodrell Street, we do have this area here where we have a surveyed channel bottom that is higher than what that elevation would be if we went off the borings. And again, one of the reasons behind that is that we didn't do a boring in this particular stretch just to the east of Jodrell, that you know, 400 or 500 foot stretch. We generally spaced out our soil borings every you know, 500 to 600 feet, but it didn't happen to be in this one particular area. So I'll move on and look at, well, what if we adjusted the grade so that if we went back from the furthest soil boring to the west and ran a 0% or flat slope back, what would that look like until you'd come back to where we'd hit these soil borings? And again, you'd be a little higher than the soil boring just to the west of Jodrell Street. We still have this issue with this area though, where the hard pan bottom that we surveyed here is about a foot above the where the as constructed gradient would be. And another option that we could potentially look at is what would the gradient be if you just followed the channel bottom that we surveyed here? And you can see it kind of goes up and down and up and down. And you may wonder, why is that occurring? Why does it look like that? And I'll note a couple of things. On either side of Jodrell Street, there are some larger or wetter areas on either side, where it appears when you look at an aerial that there may be some deeper peats in those areas. And in that, and when I say deeper peats, I'm not talking about, 15 or 20 feet. I'm talking about maybe, 5 or 6 feet deep. And so what I believe, and those areas do coincide with these lower areas on the system here. And what I believe is that when either cleanouts have occurred or just from general washing out of the ditch, that there's probably some peat in these areas that is no longer sitting in the ditch in those areas. And again, presumably when they dug the ditch out, they likely wouldn't have dug in and up and down like this. They would have dug something that would have had some sort of positive gradient to it. And so that's how we ended up arriving at our grade that we did provide, and we've recommended to be that as constructed condition in here. We're hitting the soil boring here that's on the upstream side. We're hitting the soil boring that is on the downstream side. We're pretty close to this one that's at station 218 plus 00. We're above the soil boring, but again, this is an area where I believe there may be some a deeper thickness of peat in here. And we do have this lower spot right in here, but again, we're matching the elevation just to the east of Jodrell Street here fairly closely. And again, that's about that 500 or so feet east of Jodrell Street. One thing I will point out is that we do have under Jodrell Street 2 different culverts here. One of them was the previous culvert that was constructed with the original construction of the street, and then the Watershed District did construct back in, I believe, about 2012, a lower culvert that is the same size, a 24-inch culvert. That lower culvert still is above that as constructed elevation. It isn't quite as high above the as constructed elevation as some of the other culverts downstream, particularly this 137th Avenue and Pine Street. And again, I know there was questions before about why wasn't Jodrell mentioned specifically in the report. The reason was that even though it is higher than the elevation of the ditch, it wasn't something specifically, I'll rephrase that. It wasn't the magnitude as some of the other culverts downstream. And again, the point of the report that we had was not to describe the condition we found along the ditch, but rather that as constructed condition. So we weren't intending to note every single observed blockage or deviation from the as constructed condition that is in this location. I will note that there are a couple other locations that were not noted in our engineer's report that are above the as constructed elevation. One part I'll note is just to the downstream of this 137th Avenue, there is sediment that has built up there that I believe may be due to a pipeline crossing that is further downstream between 137th and Jodrell. We did not note that either in our engineer's report because that, again, wasn't the purpose of that report. Just to give you a little background on that. But certainly if there is any repairs that are reviewed in here, I would recommend looking at Jodrell in addition to the other culvert locations as to whether there is a necessity to consider an alternative elevation or sizing capacity in any of those locations.
Okay, we've had the presentation. Do we need a vote before we have discussion with Chris, or should we?
No, I understood, John Kolb to share with you. You're free to discuss.
We didn't go ahead and discuss. Okay.
Yep, and the board may-
Andrew Waller has.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have first of all, Chris, these high areas that you're describing that are due to the pipelines or such, that's all in the profile in the report, but it doesn't have a written narrative. Is that what you're telling me?
That is correct. Each one of these is shown as being higher than the as constructed elevation within our mapping. We just didn't provide a narrative of all of these locations in the report, again, because that wasn't the purpose and intent of the report.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that when you say it's not in the report, that it's not in the written narrative in the report, but it is in the actual profile diagrams and mapping, and somebody who understands how to read those things, well, could find that. But the general public,
Would not know.
I'm sure, isn't going to notice that right away unless you scrutinize the diagrams. And so, but I just want to make that clear that it is in the report, although not in narrative.
Go ahead, Manager Wade.
Well, I didn't know we were gonna get to discuss it today, and I don't have any of my stuff with me, but I've got other things that I was gonna show the board. Different engineering and a bunch of other issues that I think aren't necessarily wrong, but that I think should be understood and included in this. And I think there's a way to work with the city on this. I know that they, from what I understand, are cognizant of the problem and are interested in working together on it. And there are some questions that I really would like to at least show the other members of what I've got before. We're not in a rush to do this because we're not going to do anything on it for I don't know how long. So there's not an emergency to pass this, and I'm wondering if we can at least hold off and have a workshop where I can show you the information that I have just for, and I don't know where it will go.
President Reiner, I'll just note that John Kolb has its hand up, and as a portion of that, I'll note that it's important for us to the distinct processes within ditch law. We're looking at the ASIC and then what repairs and that sort of thing. So I'll leave it at that.
Manager Bradley.
So
No,
this is my 7th year. I've been living with the ditch that time. You guys have been living with it a lot longer.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole reason we came back to look at this again is because we know we didn't do it right the first time. And so the issue is, what do we have to do to make it right this time? And maybe Joe Drell and the culverts solve the problem. You haven't told me what solving these problems due to the underlying flooding problem. We all went out to property. We all looked at the historical damage done to that property. We all know that property's been damaged as a result of that ditch not functioning the way it used to function before we fixed it. So when you show me 5 alternative ways of setting the ditch bottom, I'd like to know which of those fixes the problem. And to me, it seems to me that we ought to be looking at Joe Drell and the area which is too high was on the right, I think it's west, but I'm not sure. Which of those bottoms we ought to set to fix this. So I would be happy to have you come back and explain to me not what you've given me as a reasonable alternative, but it may not be the best alternative. And until you tell me the consequences of each of those options, I don't know which is the best option.
All right, that's good. John, did you want to say something in between here? No, Jeff.
If I could, Madam President. So first of all, the presentation and the information provided by Chris was intended to give context to what is located at approximately paragraphs 16 through 19 of the draft order, which are really a response to the written materials that were submitted by Perry Wagaman during your continued written comment open period. And so that's really why Chris is going through in more detail this issue of what was in the narrative report versus what is being proposed that you adopt as the reestablished grade line configuration, hydraulic efficiency, all of those things that are listed out in the order. So that's number one. Number two is you are called upon, and I appreciate the burden that's being placed on you, but you are called upon by statute to consider the evidence and to adopt an order or a technical grade line configuration, hydraulic efficiency, alignment, all of those things specified in the statute that are best supported by the weight of the evidence. So you're not considering what fixes a problem. You are considering what does the evidence indicate is the most likely as constructed condition of this drainage system. And so what we were trying to do was address the comments provided by Mr. Wagaman that seemingly cast doubt upon your appointed engineer's evaluation of the evidence, investigation, and presentation of that evidence to you. So in the end, I want to refocus you on this is an evidentiary proceeding and you're called upon to make a decision based on what is the weight of evidence as best available to you in these proceedings. We've already noted the fact that the last time you went through this was prior to the adoption of 103E 101 subdivision 4A, which you were cobbling together a bunch of other authorities under both drainage law and under your watershed law to better define what the configuration and alignment of ACD 102232 was in anticipation of a repair of areas across the system. You then discovered additional evidence that was better than what you had originally, and you reinitiated the process under the new statutory authority. So again, just putting into context why Chris has presented what he's presented, where that falls out into the draft order, and then reminding you that this is not about solving a problem so much as it is about weighing the evidence and determining what is the most likely as constructed configuration of this ditch, and then deciding on that. And so again, you are in no hurry to adopt this. But you are in the midst of a proceeding. And so if we proceed to not do anything today, then we want to further continue for more evaluation of evidence. And that's a fine alternative for you. But I just want to make you aware of what that role is and what context we're making a decision in.
And
Go ahead, Steve.
well, I was just going to say, I do have evidence that I would like to show the board members that is not here today. Because I didn't know I was gonna have a chance to be honest, or I would have brought it along, but we're not in a rush to do this, are we? I mean, is there some reason there's a panic to get this done? Or do we have time to discuss it at a workshop?
President Reiner, there is no rush. I think the concern about the condition on lands surrounding the ditch caused the board to direct us to look further at establishing an ASIC north of Pine Street. As John noted, the previous work was predominantly south of Pine, and cobbling and the new statute allowed us to define the ASIC north of it. I would share, and I'm hearing Manager Wagaman share he's got some information, and he'd like it to share it with the board, which is great. I would note it may be best to receive that as soon as possible so that your engineer can examine it in a way that brings it into his examination and is able to respond. Certainly the board is free to ask questions and whatever that work brings about. But that, of course, is dependent on if you recess into what meeting and those types of things.
My question actually is to the ASIC. I mean, it does go directly to what we're discussing here today, so
Let's
it's
go
not.
let's go to Manager Waller.
So this is thank you, Attorney Cole, for pointing out this is an evidentiary meeting. They listen to the evidence, and that obviously there's some more evidence to be presented by Manager Wagaman. But I would like to hear the drainage inspector, Tom Schmidt, because he's been very instrumental in the beginning of this. And I assume he's going to be back to work shortly because the doctor wrote a note that said he could come back to work. And for me personally, that opinion, I missed that opinion not only in this evidentiary hearing, but also in the one that we just concluded about Anoka Ramsey, Washington Ditch 1. So for me, I'm willing to look forward to looking at the more evidence, and particularly, I want to hear what Schmidt has to say. He is the drainage inspector, and he knows the ground, and he knows what goes on, and he was instrumental out there in finding some of the first evidence that indicated that this current profile was incorrect.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
John, I take umbrage at your suggestion that selecting one of the other alternatives, because it would fix and return us to a state where we are no longer flooding property, is contrary to the intent of it using and selecting an A6. I want to pick an A6 that, like the ditch when it was built, didn't flood the property. We were shown at least 4 alternatives, and we ought to know which of those 4 alternatives does what the ditch originally did, which was not flood the property. And that's not looking for a solution, but looking for the solution that does what it was supposed to do. Find the ASIC that works.
May I, President Reiner, I appreciate that sentiment and that consideration, Manager Bradley. Unfortunately, the way that the law has developed, it originally, you could do that under the drainage code. You could put the system back to the anticipated function and result of that function. But after the case that required repair to be based on the as constructed condition, you could no longer reconfigure a ditch to perform as it originally performed. And the reason for that is I think very well known to this board, is that we're dealing with change in magnitude and frequency of storm events. We're dealing with changes in land uses that accelerate and change the rate and volume of runoff and the capacity demand that's being placed on the ditch. And the courts have been very clear about what constitutes repair versus what constitutes improvement. And that's, the statute is written in a way that requires this verification of what was originally constructed. So again, if you have 4 alternatives of what might have been originally constructed, I appreciate that. And then you have to listen to the evidence and decide which one of those 4 alternatives as to what may have been originally constructed is best supported by the weight of evidence. And what I'm hearing today is that the board is doubtful that it has received all of the evidence that may be relevant to its consideration. And there seems to be a general desire within the board to open the proceedings back up to the receipt of such evidence so that you can better inform your ultimate decision. And if that is the consensus of the board or the desire of the board, then my recommendation would be that you someone submit a motion to reopen the proceedings, hold them open for the receipt of an analysis of additional evidence, and then we will, instead of, you can either continue this to a date time certain for more public comment and receipt of evidence, or you can leave it open indefinitely and then renotice it when you get to the point where you think you're going to actually have a final point of receipt and review of all that evidence in a public hearing context.
Madam President,
Go ahead.
I would support such language. It was just given by Attorney Cole and in a motion. And if John, you'd be so kind as to
And leave it open so that we can come back and repost to.
Yeah, so that I have the proper language.
Yeah.
In my motion.
Go ahead.
President Reiner, Attorney Cole, if I could, would that include in real time that we could submit that to the engineer for his consideration as well? So we were diligent in review.
Yeah, and have Mr. Schmidt back too. I think that's important.
Well, then the other thing I want to ask is, when I looked on page 3 of 5, and again, it says concluding that the repair was infeasible as cost of mitigation repairs would be prohibitive. We still, I don't remember, or I don't know if the rest of the board knows, what is the cost? If it's something prohibitive, we need to know that right away, or part of the discussion, I should say.
Yeah.
You know,
President Reiner, I think that's an echoing of EOR's position and not your engineer on that, Houston's position on the cost of the mitigation, but I agree. That cost hasn't been provided. And then again, I'm distinguishing between ASIC determination and what repairs may follow in
So
lowering the
so
call.
that should not have been included in this report then, because this is an attack on the request to use EORs, stating it as a justification for not using EOR, it was going to be
Yes.
prohibited. So that shouldn't be in here then. And so
Okay, so we have
I
a,
like John's motion. We're going to come back and I want to hear of the various alternatives, because they were all alternatives that used the as constructed borings to justify it. But also the fact that we don't know what it is west of Joyelle Street, because there had been no boring there. So we can pick which one is in fact the best as constructed alternative.
So let's get the motion back to the language that John gave earlier. And it allowed us to reopen the proceedings and hold it open till we received information. I don't have that language in front of me. John, would you be so kind as to repeat it?
President Pryor, before that language is provided, again, I noted your district engineer and his involvement in anything that's submitted. But additionally, with Manager Bradley's comment regarding borings, at the board's direction, perhaps it's important for additional borings in the area that might be good at verifying anything that is submitted and that additional research.
Wouldn't we want to look at, I mean, I would think we'd want to wait to do that till after I show you what I've got. It may make a difference.
Exactly, in light of whatever is submitted.
Okay, I was gonna say, because I hate to see you spend money, you may not have to, is what I'm getting at. So,
Certainly, and I would leave that to the judgment of your engineer in coordination with me assisting the board through it.
So are we back to having Mr. Kolb repeat this because I wasn't fast enough to write it down?
but I don't, did we want to leave it open or did we want to close it and then at another time come back to it? I would like to have all the time, not leave it open as a hearing. I don't know if that's.
leave it, you want to leave it so that we can.
Well, if you close the hearing, then I think you need to leave the hearing open so that we can continue to accept the evidence. Once you close the hearing, that's kind of a cutoff point and it may not be able to submit anything more.
Okay,
So
well,
I
let's
think
leave it
that's what
just
he was
as-
getting at.
Yeah.
Mr. Kolb, please rescue me.
Madam President, if I may, to the rescue of Manager Waller. And I'm not hesitant at all to rescue him. I would recommend a motion to reopen the proceedings for the submission and evaluation of additional evidence relative to the establishment of or reestablishment of drainage system records defining the grade, alignment, and hydraulic efficiency and right-of-way of ACD 10-2232 and continuing the public hearing to a date to be determined and to be noticed in accordance with statute.
Second.
We have a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second.
Let me be,
Further discussion.
let me just be clear here. Teresa, do you have all of that? Because I'm nowhere near fast enough.
We got it.
Okay, that's,
Say it's your motion.
this is my motion, to Mr. Kolb's language, and we have Mr. Manager Bradley gave a
I
second.
seconded Mr. Waller's motion.
Thank you.
And that is,
Yeah,
so we still have discussion, any further discussion. All I can say is I'd sure like to get this right this time. Whatever right is, I want it to be
well,
permanent.
Madam President, I don't disagree with you. I am a longtime proponent of the drainage system. And I look forward, I think it's very important that we have the Tom Schmidt back, our inspector, during these evidence hearings. Because he he's the one who kicked the ball off on this, and he's caught many of these things over the years. It's very important that we have his opinion. I miss it greatly, and I'm looking forward to him being back here. Did you hear me, Louis?
Well, and then that begs a question for me, if we're still moving along in this and Mr. Schmidt's issues aren't all taken care of, we can still have him sit at the table and tell us.
Oh, he's authorized to come back here. I don't see that.
So I just want to make sure everybody's clear, you know, whether. he's-
Madam Chair, please call the question. Please call the question.
Okay, we'll call the question and we'll do it by roll call. Waller,
Yes.
Winan,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Wakeman.
Um,
That's the post.
Abstaining? Yes,
Okay, yes, you want more evidence?
yes. Well, I'm just wondering if I could.
Okay, and Prater, yes. So we are going to go ahead with that as suggested by the attorney Foley. Okay, motion passes. Anything else on that? Let's leave that alone and go to terminate alternative board meeting format. That'd be Nick.
Yes, President Klein, the next item on the agenda is to, as you said, consider terminating the current alternative format meeting under the decline of the COVID pandemic. I'll note that in Minnesota, back in November, December of 2020, at its peak, COVID was infecting about 6,500 to 7,000 folks a day. And we saw about 70 deaths a day. Today, we're averaging about 100 new cases a day and only 5 deaths. As tragic as that is, it is a significant decline. We had determined that it was neither feasible or prudent for us to hold in-person meetings back in March of 2020. And that is to remain in place until you withdraw it. You and I did discuss the matter and look to withdraw that effective on July 1st here. The board calendar currently notes our workshop and meetings are remote, and we would have to update that to reflect in-person meetings. So it's staff's recommendation that the board approve the attached resolution to terminate the alternative meeting format. When you do file that withdrawal notice, and then update the manager's calendar, or the board's calendar, I should say. And certainly can we reserve to impose measures as there may be changes on the landscape with COVID pandemic. With that, there's a proposed motion at bottom page 66.
This is Manager Wagon, I offer and move approval of resolution 2021-12, resolving that the Rice Creek Watershed Board of Managers terminate alternative meeting format under Minnesota statutes 13B.021 on the filing of the President Briner's withdrawal, update the Board of Managers calendar, and resolve to impose measures to address risks of the pandemic.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the vote. Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Winan,
Yes.
Manager Bradley,
Yes.
Manager Wakeman,
Yes.
and Manager Briner, yes, motion passes.
I assume City of Jordan is gonna let us come in.
Yes. President.
Okay.
Board managers, yes, Teresa's been in communication with myself as well as Shoreview on the matter, and we're making arrangements to have the video recording in place and all of the typical things we had prior to the pandemic. So,
That'd be nice.
all right.
Next one is the district office transition.
Yes, President Briner, board managers, next on the agenda is a transition of the district office to open. Along a similar timeline, the district's office went into remote status, if you will, and folks were working from home with essential staff coming in to execute those essential duties. The governor's order 2121 rescinds requirements of work from home and the maintenance of a preparedness plan at the district office. It also rescinds the need to have the face mask coverings and social distancing ideas, although it is certainly our purpose to encourage safety and precautions to support good health. We would like to transition the office to the pre-pandemic operations on the month of July to reestablish the equipment function as people bring computers and such back into the office and begin working here, and then open the office on August 2nd with staff full-time here. With that, entertain any questions. Bottom of page 70, we have a closed motion.
Madam President, I'll make the motion for the to open the district office at August 2nd after a July transition period for the discussion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion.
So, Madam President, I'd like to emphasize the written narrative here where it says, continue to practice precautions of continued mask use or social distancing, hand washing, and disinfecting surfaces of the, so this to me means, and I'm not objecting to this, I want to reemphasize what I'm doing, is that for a fellow like me, who happens to have a constant nasal drip problem that's aggravated by such things as air conditioning and forced air heat and such. And so I wear my mask, even though I've had 2 Pfizer shots months ago, you know, all of that, and we'll bring proof if necessary. But I personally don't want to cause my coughing or such to disturb it. So I wear my mask for my own protection, but also because I'm conscious of protecting others. And I firmly believe that later on this fall, when the cold, dry weather comes back, so will the masks. But in between then, I noted that if I'm in a large building with huge amount of air conditioning, that the mask has been more helpful to me. And so I've continued to use it.
That's awesome.
So I don't want anybody here to think that they're now compelled to stop hand washing, to stop the social distancing, or to stop the use of mask wearing if they voluntarily do that.
That's an individual decision.
Yeah, and is that, is my understanding correct here? Board,
I agree with that. I think everybody should do what's comfortable for them.
Yeah, President Pryor, I've heard other staff note, similar health, advocating for their health in that way. We do have the sanitizers and disinfectant on hand. It's a good practice, general health. I think the public in general is aware of taking precautions to protect themselves. So I would agree.
I just point out, Madam President, I read recently that ordinary flu last winter was at an all-time low. And I think that
Masks work.
yeah, the mask really, and the social distancing, and for the very purposes of preventing the deaths from COVID-19 or 21 or 25, whichever COVID we're in now, because there's variants. But that it is good health practice.
Okay, anything else? We'll call the vote. Manager Wyman,
Yes.
Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Wageman,
Yes.
Manager Bradley.
Yes.
Manager Kreiner, yes. Motion passes. Okay, City of Roseville.
Yes. President Pryor, I see Kyle has joined us for that.
Hey,
Yes,
Kyle?
yeah, Madam President, members of the board, I'm here to provide you an update on the City of Roseville's work on Ramsey County Ditch 4 between, the former Ramsey County Ditch 4 between County Road C and Terrace Drive. As you recall, that segment and other portions of the ditch were transferred to Roseville earlier this year. The project is well underway, and the portion of the project that we're involved in financially there is nearly complete. And I am going to intend to share some pictures with the board in case you haven't been down there recently. So let me know. I should. There we go. everybody see this just fine?
Yes.
Okay, so this was back kind of late May, right around Memorial Day. Work began out at the site to install the pipe between County Road C and Harris Drive. June 9th, I got down there and took a look at some of the early work after the clearing and grubbing was done. And the contractor started near the north end up at Terrace Drive. And this view is looking at Terrace Drive. You can see the concrete vault there that's present in the fill area. And that's like a 12-foot wide box vault that marks the transition between the new pipe and the old existing box culvert that carried the ditch underneath Terrace Drive to Oasis Pond, which is just off behind the trees there. So you can see the work's, well underway. This is looking then from that point back south toward some of the areas where you can see some of that redevelopment occurring behind the truck terminal. And, they were making good progress back then. Just yesterday, I stopped out again to see where they're at. This is standing at County Road C at the south end of the project, and there's only a small bit here left to go. Much of the pipe and all that work is complete. You can see the contractor is working their way to the south there. This is just to give you an idea of the scope and size of the pipe that's going in. These are 84-inch concrete pipe segments. They've been stacked up along the project area for a couple of months now. Give you an idea, those are 8-foot high fences there. So they're big sections of pipe. You can walk right through them. So, but pretty exciting to see that work getting completed. Let me stop that sharing. So again, just wanted to give you that update of where things are at. And I think the plan was for the contractor to be wrapped up here by the end of the month with the pipe work. And it looks like they're on pace to do that. But the purpose of this agenda item, ultimately, the city of Roseville has requested that the Watershed District consider making partial reimbursement for some of the project costs. As you'll recall, the bids for that portion of the work, the pipe and mass grading, was right around $2.5 million was the bid that the city of Roseville accepted. Their contract with Meyer Contracting also includes another $1.5 million approximate of work for surface improvements to the area, such as a trail, lighting, and landscaping. So that if you look through the paperwork, it's a much larger contract overall. To date, the city has expended, and this was, as of a couple weeks ago, just almost $770,000, which included, much of the pipe that was placed on site. I think they've gone far past that at this point in time. But the city had requested that we consider issuing reimbursement of 50% of our ad valorem contribution to the project. Again, as you may recall, we had $640,000 budgeted in our 2021 budget to cover the ad valorem contribution of the project. There's another $450,000 in RCD4 water management district funding that would ultimately be transferred to the city upon receipt. Those funds are being collected over a period of 3 years, and so those will be a slower process to get those carried over to the city. Given the amount of expense the city has incurred to date and the progress being made, staff finds it prudent and reasonable to provide that first reimbursement of $320,000, and then we would look to reconcile the final project costs at the end of construction before the remainder of ad valorem funds are conveyed to the city. With that, again, I'd be open to any questions that the board may have about the project or where it's at. But where we're at, things are looking good, and I think we're ready to make that first payment. So,
Any questions?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
Manager Wynant here. I move to approve the City of Roseville's reimbursement request and direct staff to issue a payment in the amount of $320,000.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Madam President, I just comment, I'm glad to hear about the 84-inch culverts that I can walk through. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope that's enough.
We're going to call for a vote. Manager Wynant?
Yes.
Manager Waller?
Yes.
Manager Bradley?
Yes.
Manager Wegman?
Yes.
Manager Briner, yes, motion passes. Okay. That is the, Nick, I believe it's you here on public
Yeah.
drainage facilities.
President Pryor, Board Manager, next item on the agenda is the Public Drainage and Facility Coordinator position. This is position that came out of our special workshop on April 26, 2021, where we discussed some human resource and policy issues, as well as some coordination with the Personnel Sounding Board of Manager Wynett and Kleiner. The consensus was to come forward with this position and engage consultants to develop it. Erica Selena of Working Smarts is online with us. That is a consulting firm that developed it. The direction shared with Erica included the watershed management plan, the public drainage system and its operations, as well as some Blue Earth County job descriptions that were previously referenced by a couple of managers in regards to the position. From there, I did work with, and Erica did as well, with Chris Otterness, our district engineer on public drainage, as well as Kyle Axtell on the job description. I also shared with the managers by email yesterday the placement of the position by Gallagher, human resource firm. It came back as a grade 10. I'll note the comment in that assignment in the job description about day-to-day direction, and there's currently one position noted in the job description. That could be two without a change in this placement that they've done. Further, the funding for the position would come from Fund 80, Ditch and Creek Maintenance, as well as Fund 95, which is your facilities budget item. We are looking for a date to approval of the position, the fund location to use it, and then posting for applicants. I'll note that the job description is an exempt position. That would be it's noted differently, and we just want to get that corrected.
Oh, that was one of my questions.
And can you repeat that last line? I missed what you said on the exempt part.
Yeah, the job description in the title block says it's non-exempt, but it is, that is incorrect. It is an exempt position, as are all the positions at the district.
Okay.
Yes.
So are you finished?
Yep.
I'll make the motion for the discussion here that we approve the public drainage facilities position description funded from Fund 80 Ditch and Creek Maintenance and Fund 95 and post the position for applicants.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second.
Now, I have some amendments to it, discuss some amendments. First of all, yeah, okay. Well, for a change, I'll go first. if you-
Please.
So number one, I think the title of this ought to be Public Drainage Inspector and Facilities Coordinator. All right, I say that because the district inspector is a very important part here. I don't disagree with anything that's been presented, by the way, you know, as far as the facility, but I think he ought to be also the inspector.
Okay, let's take one thing at a time. Okay. We want to discuss that issue.
What, can you repeat what you?
Well, I
you
think
called
that
it?
the title
Just
should
the
be
title?
Public Drainage Inspector and Facilities Coordinator position.
Okay, and it wasn't that because Nick, you want-
Well, the comment, the response, President Pryor, Board of Managers, would be that you currently have a public drainage inspector position at the district. So
So-
it is I'm distinguishing between the district's development of its organization and what positions it will have versus the employees that currently serve positions.
So, Madam President, I realize that there is a position, but I'm saying that this position is senior to the current position, and therefore it needs to be the inspector. The reason I say that is because 103E.065 requires us to have an inspector, for the inspector to report to the Drainage Authority Board, which is us, and that we set the salary and give his review. That's required by state law and statute. It used to be, I went back to my old book I purchased, I don't know, 25 years ago. And it used to see what the law was at the time, and it didn't say watershed districts, it just said county boards. So this, now checking the recent update to this, that means that that individual inspector would report to the board, you know, as it, and that's the way it used to be, by the way, before the 1990s, when things got muddled and changed. And I personally believe that failing to separate those two, is, which the state statute requires, from the administrative position over the years, not so much recently, has been provided a culture for well-intended, but an agenda that was anti-drainage. And so to prevent that from happening, so we don't have any more situations that we discussed earlier in this meeting, I think you need to have a separation of that as the state statute requires. And so that this title then becomes the inspector. And yes, there'd have to be some renaming, say assistant inspectors or such for those other positions down below in the staff. And I think that's an important position. This would, because it's appointed, it would be exempt. It's required to be appointed. That's an exempt job. In my experience, it's usually appointed jobs are exempt. And the other thing I thought about this is this job should have.
Wait a minute, let's settle the first issue first.
Okay.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
go
I have
ahead.
okay, this is to John. Are you suggesting that the quote ditch inspector reports only to the board?
I'm suggesting the state law says that. 103.065 says that it'll be appointed and then by the board, that the board will set his salary and the board will set his time of employment. And so I think that.
John Kolb, can you clarify that? Because that's not my understanding.
It
Madam
would
President,
be Lewis here, yeah.
yeah, I'll first read the statute and then offer my interpretation of it. The statute says that in counties or watershed districts having drainage systems constructed in accordance with this chapter, the drainage authority shall appoint a competent person as drainage inspector. The inspector must not be a county commissioner. The inspector may be the county highway engineer. The inspector shall examine the drainage systems designated by the drainage authority. The drainage authority shall specify the appointment period and compensation. Our view would be that none of those provisions would require that the inspector report to the Board of Managers directly as opposed to reporting to the administrator. You as a board may wish to arrange a reporting relationship differently, but otherwise there's nothing that's required here, and the traditional approach would be for you to continue with your administrator being the person that supervises the staff.
So, can I ask a question? Nick, you said that you didn't call it a district inspector, because drainage inspector, because we already have that position. You're not going to keep both, are you? What would you eliminate the district inspector position? You establish this position?
The duties would be covered by the coordinator position. So yes, we could eliminate the lower one, but that I'm not so concerned about the titling, because you can have the coordinator responsible for those activities and the underlings, if you will, and the subordinate positions could carry it out. Yeah, so it's open, if you will. Right now, we have a public drainage inspector. We have an acting public drainage inspector with, you know.
I think it's useful when we're in public hearings, we will point to somebody and have a good simple title like drainage inspector.
Yeah.
So I support you with the idea of continuing that in the title. So,
Yeah. Okay.
drainage inspector and facility coordinator, just for ease of publicly pointing, this is our drainage.
This is the one.
I kind of agree with that. I mean, it just seems logical to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
And I support continuing what we've been doing for however many years, where we aren't the employers. We are not the best.
no, the administrators.
best at being the employer.
Yeah.
It's
Getting that done.
Administrator or whatever. And that also gives the administrator the opportunity, because I'm gonna come to this later, to, as needed, assign additional people to help. So I'm gonna try to fix a small problem I see later, which says that now he doesn't supervise a particular title, he supervises people who've been assigned that area.
Okay.
That's, we'll come to that later.
Okay.
So, Madam President,
Go ahead.
thank you for the partial support. But I think that it's very important that the Board of Managers recognize that they are the employer of exempt employees. And that this is not a non-exempt employee. And that when you do this, you allow, there's a conflict that goes on here between the regulatory WACA group and the drainage. And what you've experienced earlier today and what we're working on up in 10/22/32 is the supremacy of the WACA group over reestablishing the drainage there. And this went on for a number of years here, beginning in the 90s. All of the administrators that have been hired by the district come from that background and that culture. And there, until that culture has some, can stifle the drainage point of view. And the board is really we're managers. We're here to manage these two laws. And we need to have a hearing, whereas now you have the drainage people being supervised by the WACA folks and the regulatory. And that causes a natural defensiveness on them that may not share all the information that as managers we need in order to make a decision. So there is a natural adversarial relationship here. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need to make sure that it's balanced and that we hear both sides. So that's why I think that review in the state language allows the Board of Managers to appoint, set the salary. If you're going to set the salary, you're going to review what he does for work for it and the employment conditions separately from what the administrator might do at that point. So to me, that's important to go on in the future here and not get into lawsuits that we've had in the 30 years of business. Prior to that, 1990s, the board actually worked pretty hard at doing ditches, although it was mostly in Ramsey County. When it came to going above County Road J, which would have been our turn in the 90s, it got killed. And one of the ways to kill it was to bring in supervision that would suppress the drainage voices.
You know, I agree with 90% of what you just said. Where I kind of disagree is I still think that our administrator is in the best position to manage the people. And I'm not in the position to understand all the nuances of managing a ditch inspector. I would have no clue. And the thing is, I still think we oversee our administrator.
That's right.
Administrator sets the budgets.
Right.
Yeah.
So we still have ultimate control. I mean, ultimate.
I don't think we want two district offices.
Yeah.
I didn't
that's
say we'd
the part
have two
that
district
irritates me.
offices. I said we'd have two separations within the office, the drainage code. And the drainage code, the budget, all of these budgets come from each one of their areas. If your lakes and stream, he sets his own budget there. Yes, it goes to the administrator and the administrator presents it up here. But in this case, I think that's very important because if you have experienced the last 30 years here, you know, that's because we lost our focus. And the way to maintain that focus is to have it as an independent voice reporting to the board.
President,
Go ahead.
Reiner, if I could, a couple of items in response. Obviously, we're here today to ask the board to set the position. So this is good to have this discussion and define what's within it. I'll note, I don't believe that there is any internal conflict in regards to the various laws that exist. While I would recognize that there is competing interests within those statutes that the state's adopted. The team that you have before you responds to those, whether it be Wetland Conservation Act, our work with the DNR in regards to its public waters jurisdiction. Lauren just noted MPPA and the MS4 and its identification of the ditches as part of our MS4 system, which we don't think is accurate, and we're engaging them on discussion. So all those items we address as staff. We certainly bring forward more information when asked for it, and there's certainly no restriction or lack of motivation to bring forward to you the issues that are coming about. We're responsive to all those things.
Madam President, I would say that there's been, a long time ago, not so long ago, when we talked about the position of a new administrator, Manager Bradley asked during a meeting if there was any others, and I said to him, my understanding that no one else in the staff was going to apply for the job because they had come to a settlement on how to keep that. And I congratulate the administrator and the ditch inspector for working that out. But prior to the administrator, the ditch inspector job was here. And the ditch inspector attended every meeting. It was Dale Eklund. And he was inspector for 20 some years. And at the 90s, they just had a tremendous shift. The board membership changed. An administrator came aboard. You got different engineers, you got different lawyers. There was just a huge personnel change here on. And some of the members that came aboard were all upset about what had gone on for creating sediment pond district facilities in Lock Lake and in Long Lake. In other words, and they looked upon an administrator retired, and that administrator set the tone for not improve, for stifling the ditch work. And that happened here for a long time. So I think that historically, we would look at this. At the beginning of the district inspector was somebody who reported to the board every meeting and talked to us and told us what was going on. Now, once the WACA law came in the 90s, they hired an administrator with the WACA law background. And that set a tone where from then on, because the WACA has this unique piece of legislation in there, says if you don't fix a ditch for 25 years, too bad, chump, you got stuck. You see, and it's very difficult to get over that. And especially if you had that point of view. And some of the members of the board, Ramsey County, didn't want to spend any money on ditches. They were against it. I think that's an important point here, that by separating these jobs, we would just codify the informal agreement that exists between the two positions.
I think you're setting us up for possible conflict within staff without having one administrator administrating all the staff.
Mhm.
I really believe that's what we have administrator. And times have changed, John. I mean.
In the macro, I agree with you,
Yeah.
but when you get down to the detail.
Yeah, if organizations have more than one administrator, so you have a health
No,
department.
they
you have a park
don't.
department.
So the key point is what the board does, because you could have separate administrators and still not do a damn thing.
Yeah.
So it's not the ditch inspector that does anything, it's us. We're the one that approve the budgets. We're the ones that make sure that they have the staff to do the job. And if we didn't do that, it wouldn't matter what title you gave this guy.
And we could still have him, if we wanted him to come and give reports,
Well, anytime we
we
want
can
to.
have him, we could have him give reports and still report.
And
I'd
certainly,
like to take a moment and ask Erica, now she's heard some of the conversation and she helped put this together. Any thoughts?
I won't be legally, but I have a lot of thoughts, but trying to think of the most pertinent and helpful at this point. My personal opinion and my professional opinion would be that it makes best sense to have the administrator continue to give daily operational oversight and supervision to all staff, including this position we're talking about, but also that the administrator is the person who is in touch with the cohesion within the entire staff, and that is not to be undervalued, I think.
Go ahead, Nick.
President Reiner, board managers, I think it's important to say that the watershed district and all that we're discussing and the history and how these positions of the watershed or the changes through time are all very true. That a watershed district is a very dynamic entity. This is some of the foundational things that are, democratic process have is discussion and direction on these things. Obviously, new laws are adopted and we have to respond to those. And perhaps to Manager Waller's point, that takes some time to see the evolution and the clarity we need. I think the district's, to the potential conflict idea, I think the district's done a good job of utilizing its engineer and attorney to forge a path ahead to make sure we're responsive to those obligations we have on public drainage. We notably have had situations where we've used mitigation credit to address the law and follow through with it. And also use the available exemptions and the technical data to support that we're adhering to it, but also maintaining the public drainage. I think you've done that for the last 10 to 12 years. Staff are responsive to the board and I don't see a change in that continuing focus. The job description is written off of, in part, your watershed management plan and the direction that it gives staff to move this work through all the systems that exist.
Okay,
Well, man.
I think, wait, Mike had some comments.
I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
move on to the next.
Yeah, let's move this one.
I've got one more thing to say here.
Okay.
Well, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
I would just like to reinforce the fact that we're talking about a governance issue here, John. And the board sets the direction of the organization and the administrator directs it. And what we as a board have realized is that the ditches, yes, indeed, are important, that we have continuing development in this watershed that's dependent upon the ditches to convey water, and we directed the administrator to put a job description together. He has in this elevated the position of the ditch inspector to a coordinator, which, as I am aware, is equivalent to the water quality person, as well as some others. So this position increases the responsibility of that coordinator. So I think it hits all your points, John. The only difference we might have is the governance piece in this. And I would concur with my other three board members that this is the administrator's job to oversee staff. Thank you.
Well, Madam President, the final thing I wanted to say about this is I don't agree with that. You have to have a voice in front of the board to hear a difference and on the record. And if you don't have that, you have a problem. But the other thing I'd say about this is I would have liked to see this job elevated to the need for a master's degree, public policy or public administration. And I think that's an important item. I didn't see it in here. When you get to this point of view, that would help with the governance issues. And so we don't have a requirement for that. It's time we should start to take a look at elevating our.
Was that discussed, Nick or Erica, when you brought this together? The need for a master's?
We've got an associate degree. It's on the top of page.
But did they discuss the?
We did. Associate's degree was the minimum qualification, and the bachelor's or advanced degree in particular areas was the preferred. We looked at other organizations for similar types of positions doing similar work, and thought this was concurrent with others as well. you know, it doesn't, stating it this way doesn't mean that you couldn't look for someone with an advanced degree. It just means that the absolute bottom line is the minimum required is the associates.
Yeah,
You responded, yeah. So if you had someone who's been doing this for 35 years,
Yeah.
and they're like, they may only have an associate degree, if they're coming out of school, they've been doing it for 5 years, they may have more education just because of the way things are. My wife is a physical therapist, she only had a bachelor's degree. These days, they all have 3-year doctoral degrees. But I gotta tell you, after 40 years of practicing physical therapy, she was as good as any of those new college grads, so.
And probably better.
So the degrees.
So it doesn't mean we can't, it just means.
No, that's the
Yeah.
thing. You don't want to preclude somebody because that's my only issue.
Well, that's-
Because I don't disagree. It'd be nice to have a master's degree, but
Precluding people isn't uncommon. It's called a license. You see, I can't practice law, but Mike had a license, he could practice law. I was precluded from doing it.
yeah, but if we leave it as that's the minimum requirement, that does not preclude people that don't have a master's
Someone
degree.
who's a better candidate.
Right.
Because they have education.
They have experience.
Erica has a comment.
Thank you. Just one note, when you're setting up your interview protocol and the questions and then scoring the question responses that you get, scoring the candidate on their responses to the questions, but also what they bring on paper, you can structure the scoring in such a way that you give more value to someone with an advanced degree than you would an associate's degree. So I'm just concurring. It doesn't preclude you from looking for someone with an advanced degree. It just gives you more options. And then in the scoring of the interviews.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so,
my proposed changes, if we're done with
yeah,
that.
go ahead.
6A gives day-to-day direction to technical field assistant. I'm hoping that we will have more flexibility in deciding, and the administrator may find that time to time to need to put more people than one person to assist in this thing. So something broader like gives day-to-day direction to individuals assigned to work under the coordinator's supervision or something broader than that. So that as you assign part-time people to work with them, it's not just that one position.
It's not the technical
assigned.
Yeah. That
To
makes sense.
work.
Yeah, that does make sense.
If I could, Manager Bradley, I think that sounds fine. It doesn't, as you probably saw, it doesn't change the grading to the salary scale. And maybe as this develops and now to keep the job descriptions up to date, which is what the math effort is here.
Yeah.
Certainly, we would probably define specifically who is day to day and then add the tag on and others or.
Well, today, okay, so
For task.
let's assume that we hire a new or bring Tom Schmidt back, either way.
Yeah,
You've got 3 people,
right.
so you already are outdated.
Yes, in response, I'd like to share, I think, for the program, that this is a fine idea to get that leadership in the program, facilities and public drainage system. I'm comfortable immediately with 3, but 4 might be over the top for the program and the leadership here. And that brings me to previously we discussed the technical field assistant position and not knowing the outcome of medical leave, the acting public drainage inspector, and this, I've kind of put that on hold to see how that resolves. All that said, I think we can change the language in the description to accommodate your suggestion.
But I thought that would take care of all of those.
Yeah, just maybe a more generalized statement.
Erica had her hand up.
Thank you, Madam President. I just had one comment, and that is to just keep in mind that these job descriptions are meant to be updated frequently. So they're meant to reflect what is currently needed. And so I think we added a last revised date at the bottom, which should stay there so that people are always aware of which version they're looking at. And as positions are added, certainly this could be amended then as well.
I suspect people may be assigned almost changing on a weekly basis to whether or not there's an emergency came up. Jim or Sally, go help out there. And then I would put that person underneath that supervision of the coordinator. That's all I was thinking.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Are you saying a coordinator come in and take away or not have control, and then the administrator can come in and reassign those?
No, I'm saying the administrator could assign additional persons.
Additional persons, but he necessarily couldn't go in there and grab these people on a day-to-day basis and put them over here.
Well, not if the person is the technical member.
No, I mean, I'm pointing out to you, you know.
That position is gonna be that position.
Yeah, that, you know, you just you come in there and say.
I'm thinking more people may be needed on a temporary basis.
President Pryor, all the
The administrator, pardon me, so I understand, Manager Brad. So you're saying the administrator would have the opportunity to assign more people to not necessarily just take them away.
That's correct.
Okay, I want to make sure.
President Pryor, I would acknowledge that both occur, that the district's small office and the periodic intense workload does cause us to rally around a specific project and accomplish the goal. Most recently, Mr. Koshin asked in regards to the CART program and the need to move equipment, and asked for folks to, could you please assist me in accomplishing that? And as administrator, I certainly encourage that. We don't want anyone to be overly strained in doing the work, and they need help. We do so. So there is an ebb and flow across positions already.
Yeah.
So Madam President, the other question I have is on page 85, contrasting number 2, which had 3 years of experience with standard soil and water conservation practices, and underneath that preferred qualifications to at least 6 years of relevant professional experience in technical field. Are those in conflict? I say one's minimum, one's preferred. I got it. I'll withdraw my question.
Okay.
Good, that was a law.
I'm glad.
All right. Anything else on this?
President
Yeah.
Pryor, just to reflect on Manager Bradley's original point, I would think the acknowledgement of the 103E public drainage inspector, that would also be included as a likely a statement. I don't see it in the moment under item 1. But I'm understanding you to also say it'd be best pronounced in the position title. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anything out of your neck or further questions? Like the board.
Yeah, President Pryor, I'm satisfied. I would note Mr. Smith and Ms. Selena, if they have any questions before we move on.
I have one more question if I could.
Okay, let's go to Manager Bradley then.
Page 87, conditions of employment, reliable vehicle and ability to travel to and from locations inaccessible by public transportation. We don't provide a vehicle. We require our employees to provide their own vehicle.
We have vehicles.
We have vehicles.
Yeah.
In the absence of a vehicle, staff do use their own personal vehicle.
With this position, I'm surprised by it. That's all.
Okay,
That we require an employee as a condition of employment to have used their own private vehicle. It's okay if we do, but I would have thought this position had access to.
Well, this position would have access to our vehicles
yeah.
or any.
Any of the
Yeah,
positions
any of
have access to our vehicles, you know. I suppose there may be a case where the vehicles are under repair or those types of things, and them being able to assist the district further with their own vehicle.
Or you could remove that, just leave the ability to travel to and from
Well,
without saying reliable.
well, if they have our car or vehicle,
Yeah.
then they would have that. So
And they use it.
we are in fact requiring them to have a brand new vehicle available for work. And if that's something we need to do, then it's something we need to do. Just as express.
Go ahead.
President Reiner, Erica, is there any clarity you might add to that inclusion there? I just took it as kind of matter of fact statement.
I think the only consideration I would have around that condition of employment in any context would be, is this going to eliminate good candidates from being attracted to and holding this position? And I think about diversity as well, along those same lines. And is requiring a reliable vehicle going to knock out some people from being contenders for this position? But given that it's critical for this person to be able to get to maybe unpaved and remote locations during job hours, I believe it is an understandable and justifiable condition for employment here. And I would leave the reliable vehicle terminology in there just because of the possibility of the situation that you just described, Nick.
So what is, or what's the definition of a reliable vehicle?
Starts
Yeah, four wheel.
in the winter. There have been times when I even could not have gotten this job.
You and me both.
So since Madam President, the consultant just mentioned diversity and opportunities for others. I'm wondering, this requirement of 50 pounds, is that lifting ability? Is that going to be an impediment to a good long-term experienced individual and exclude them just for that purpose on these physical requirements?
Well, I think you gotta have it.
Well, I don't see why 50 pounds is the unique level, I mean, wherever that comes from.
Depends on what the equipment is and what they, this is my limited knowledge, this is a fairly physical job.
It's physical walking, but I don't think there's that much lifting or stacking to go with it.
There's a lot of yanking four-wheelers off the trailers and.
But 40 pounds is not uncommon.
Well, it's still.
So, the other thing I see about that is that, I was surprised that you're looking at this, this issue of watercraft. The only ditch inspector I ever remember that had an interest in watercraft was the one who borrowed the boat so he could go duck hunting or fishing on weekends. Our ditches don't have really watercraft size to them, as such. And so, while that might be important for the lake specialist, not necessarily for the drainage man, because he does most of his work from the shore and not necessarily. And I think we've discovered that even that it's best to have sizable, when we're going to go out there and do the work, we hire a consultant that brings it, or a contractor that brings his equipment with him. And we don't have that kind of operational equipment, necessary. So I'm just, when you talk about the diversity and not excluding anyone, and want to make sure we weren't writing something in here that would later on be a problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, does this position necessarily have to?
See that maybe wait until President.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
Taking a brief.
Not paying attention.
Brief intermission here.
I'm gonna take the same time frame.
Yeah, I moved and we have a 5-minute recess.
Second.
There you go. Of course, the two old guys are running to the bathroom. That's an unusual thing.
It's very, I'm pretty careful how much I drink before meetings.
Yeah. This is true.
Back when I was doing trials, I could go 3 hours.
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't afford that to be able to pay attention.
I knew an old guy who was at my age now than when I was in my twenties. He told me once that he was a broker, downtown. He had some friends that were gonna purchase a corporation and they went to New York. And there was a meeting and they got into the meeting. And that was one of the rules. You couldn't leave the bathroom. They were there for 10 hours, he said. He said it was done just purposely so that if you had to get up and go out of the room, the opposite side could, negotiations. So I always remember that story about,
All right, we're ready to go again. Sorry. No problem, sorry. Yep.
Yes, in response to the discussion and a couple of points that we helpful to the board here. The state, the use of the term watercraft, I would say is a generalized use. I know that we have the Moby track, which isn't a boat, but a vehicle for on water. Also we use a canoe in some areas like Rice Lake, JD2, and where we have the weir and all those issues to ensure the public drainage system is functioning and observe it firsthand. To the 50 pounds statement, it is throughout the district's descriptions and appears to be what the district determined a safe position for one person to lift, and then from that point forward, presumably it's best to seek assistance and that sort of thing and promotes safety. That's my thoughts on those two items.
maybe that should be revisited. Some gals wouldn't be able to lift 50 pounds.
Well, in all the restaurant business, we had to lift 50 pounds in order to do your business. So if it
Yeah.
takes that,
5 pounds more than a bag of salt. I don't know.
My wife carries 2 bags, 3-pound bags, one in each hand.
well,
Or you could take 5 tens.
When I get older, I will.
Believe me, I'm already there.
well, I think as long as it's consistent, with all the other employees, I think it's, I mean, if we were having a different one, I'd be more concerned, but as long as everybody in every description pretty much is that job.
Yeah, it's what I've seen in the
Yeah.
existing descriptions and there's use here.
Okay, so we're back. Do we have a motion and a second?
We had that, I think.
And we talked about
Discussion.
we had the discussion.
We had an amendment to the
Are we going to,
title, that was it.
Yeah, and that's one sentence, but
Yeah.
Yeah. So this doesn't really need to come back, we can move it forward?
Yep.
Okay, with changes. Anybody else? Okay, we're gonna take the vote. Marcy,
Yes.
Waller,
Yes.
Wagland,
Yes,
Bradley,
yes.
Reiner, yes, motion passes. Okay,
okay, check that.
thank you, Erica, for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam President, I move to approve the check register dated June 23rd, 2021 in the amount of $283,609.71 prepared by Redpath and Company.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Manager Weiner,
Yes.
Manager Waller,
Yes.
Manager Wagland,
Yes,
Manager Bradley,
Yes.
Manager Reiner, yes, motion passes. Okay, items for discussion. Presentation on culverts, that must be Chris.
Madam President, I believe Ashley will be leading off on this.
Okay.
Ashley, are you gonna share on your screen then?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
All right, can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
All right. Or is it still, it's still morning, so good morning, good morning, Madam President, Board of Managers. Today I'm joined by Chris with Houston Engineering, our district engineer, to discuss culverts in the public drainage system. Okay, let's see here. There we go. So here's the presentation outline. I'll start by touching on the district's role in culvert selection as it pertains to a couple of different approaches the district takes. Then I'll hand it off to Chris to discuss how the culvert sizes are determined, as well as some of the factors that are considered in the determination before moving into a couple of comparison slides. So, all right, when does the district evaluate culverts? There are two kind of mindsets that the district utilizes when considering culverts. The first is obviously as a regulator, which is addressed through the district's permitting program, as well as drainage authority considerations. The district's Rule I requires that no work be completed on a public drainage system without first obtaining a permit, in addition to obtaining any requirements under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 103E. Based on the criteria of Rule I, the district considers things like the capacity, function, inspection, and maintenance access of the public drainage system, as well as 103E findings and interim conditions of the project. The district as drainage authority also has to consider similar criteria as well. And Chris will touch in a little more in depth as to those details. So something to keep in mind is that the district has very few culverts that are actually its responsibility to maintain. The maintenance responsibility actually falls to the crossing owner, which is normally either a private landowner or a road authority. So other than existing crossings, the other time we're kind of looking at them is during the repair process. And so during the repair process, the engineer evaluates existing crossings and makes recommendations for changes if needed. This includes the private crossings as well as any crossings the district may have installed along the way. As part of this process, it's really good opportunity and something the board, you guys have been very vocal about making sure we engage with crossing owners and having as much coordination as possible on the front end about the conditions of the crossings and its future replacement if needed. So other than that, the district, during that same process, as we're looking at where are the existing crossings, we're looking at where is our inspection and maintenance corridor as well. And so in some of our, in I think every repair we've done, we've added additional crossings to ensure continuous corridor for inspection and maintenance to ease access for the future. We'll turn it over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Ashley. So first thing I'll talk about is, maybe one of the more obvious questions, what size culvert do we actually need? Or what size culvert does the applicant or other engaged party need to provide related to this work? And again, as Ashley noted, this could be part of a repair project, it could be part of a permit application review. And there's a number of different criteria we look at. We don't just look at one single criteria, but it's a number of different items. And one of the first things that we can look at that's real easy to look at is what is the size of the upstream and downstream culverts. If you have a downstream culvert that is relatively small, then having a upstream culvert that is larger may not provide a whole lot of benefit. But it isn't our only criteria, because we might have to evaluate, is that a downstream crossing too small, and do we need to make sure that all of these crossings are sized appropriately. So it's just one criteria again. Next thing we'll look at, and this may require a little bit of modeling, is what is the ability of the culvert to pass a design flow event. And we do have some of this information available readily through the district-wide model and what we've done in modeling the 210 and 100-year events. But we may need to do a little additional modeling in some cases to ensure that what is being designed is going to be sufficient. And some of the considerations that we or the crossing owner may look at is considering, like for a private crossing, what the flow function and where the overtopping elevation may be with relationship to a 2 or a 5-year event. Typically, roadway culverts are often designed for a 10-year event for minor roadways. You get up to a county roadway and they're designed for a 50-year event without overtopping. That typically is a standard required for state aid highways. And then for state and federal roadways, we look for a much higher standard, a 100-year event without overtopping. And again, this isn't to preclude the drainage authority from maintaining capacity in the public drainage system itself, but it's really, a design standard we look at to protect the roadway and the crossing themselves. Another thing we may look at is a drainage coefficient, how much runoff over the surface area can occur in a one-day period. And that often relates to what a tile capacity may provide, but you certainly, if you have a number of tiles coming into a drainage system that the district manages, you may need to look at that downstream culvert and determine whether that drainage coefficient would be sufficient. We look at head across culvert. When I use the term head, that means the water elevation on one side of the culvert versus the other side during a particular rainfall event. And if you look at, for instance, a 100-year event and you develop too much head against the culvert, that could put a crossing at risk of being blown out. And that affects not only the crossing owner, but the public drainage system itself. We look at maintenance issues, and I'll touch a little bit about that, but certainly different types of crossings may result in different kind of maintenance issues, and we have to be careful that we don't design a culvert too large, which may result in an additional maintenance issue, and I'll note on that in a little bit. And we also look at changes in floodplain. Are we going to potentially increase the floodplain upstream or lose out on opportunity to reduce the floodplain elevation in an area where we may have structures being inundated? So those are things that we take a look at as well. Next slide, please. Another few notes on design capacity. These culverts are designed to address and have capacity for surface water. We aren't looking at groundwater conveyance with these. The cross section doesn't have to match the cross section of the ditch. The pipes are going to, for a given cross section, a pipe is actually going to have a greater capacity than the ditch itself because the pipe is smoother. And we do need to have some of that head against a culvert in order to provide reduce the amount of maintenance that may be needed on a culvert. We call that cleaning velocity. If you have the velocity too low, the culverts tend to silt in, and then you may have a reduced capacity in that culvert at that point. So we kind of have to balance a number of different things. And as we're looking at the function of the drainage system, having that smaller amount of head or change in water elevation across a roadway is not a bad thing, and it may not necessarily affect the capacity or function of the drainage system. And so we tend to look at what is the size that is necessary so that upstream head on the culvert or that water elevation change, that it isn't going to affect the next upstream culvert and kind of have a cascading effect as you work your way upstream. And so those are some of the things that we look at. We again try to have each crossing have the head somewhat minimized, but we have to have some of that on each crossing. Next slide, please. Some of the other considerations in the selection, other than the capacity itself, we have to look at the size and material of the culvert. Cost, there certainly can be a drastic change in cost between different sizes of culverts, different types of culverts. Again, it's not something that's small, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second here as well. There also needs to be consideration of long-term cost. Is what kind of culvert that you're putting in, is that going to change the ability to maintain in the future, or the replacement cost in the future? We look at the location of the crossings, make sure that they're in line with the system, aren't going to result in additional scouring, but we also have to look at that elevation, determine whether it's at that as constructed elevation, how it fits in with the site itself, and what the purpose of the crossing might be, because those are all things that may affect that determination. And then there's also a structural integrity to look at. Certain culverts are appropriate in certain places. You can't, for instance, put a plastic pipe in a crossing that's going to have a 25-foot depth on it, because the plastic pipes aren't meant to have that amount of soil on top of them. Likewise, you can't put a large box culvert or even a large concrete culvert in areas with very non-supportive soils. The culverts are going to have a tendency to sink, and you may be back in there again to replace or rebed those culverts. So those are other things we need to look at. And one example of this would be where we put in some of the culvert crossings for maintenance along the drainage system. Generally, those have been in poor areas with poor bedding, PD areas, and district staff and the district engineer have worked on those to typically utilize lighter weight materials such as polyethylene pipe and corrugated steel. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about types of culverts in terms of shape. For the most part, the district culverts are either a arch or round pipe. More so the round pipe. There's a few arch pipes in the district here or there, and I'll show you in a bit what those look like and why they're used. Either case, those can be made out of plastic, metal, or reinforced concrete. And then we also have box culverts along the drainage systems in the district. Again, these box culverts are made out of concrete. Next slide, Ashley. And this is just an example of what these cross sections look like. When I say an arch pipe or a pipe arch, that's that fourth one down. It has kind of a flatter bottom on it. It's not fully circular. And oftentimes those are used where you need to have a certain capacity that you could get out of a similarly sized circular culvert, but you have a limited amount of height available in order to achieve the necessary cover over the pipe, particularly in a roadway application. Next slide. A few things regarding culvert shape. We do consider how they perform at different elevations, and we do want to consider that. In most cases, round pipes are suitable. Even though the round pipe at the very bottom of the pipe doesn't have a large cross-sectional area for the first couple inches, that is not particularly necessary or important for the function of the drainage system to have those bottom 1 or 2 inches to have that greater capacity. And again, that differs by where you're at on the drainage system. But again, the most important thing in most locations is that as you get up toward the lower third or middle of the pipe, that you do have that greater capacity in those areas to handle flows that are approaching a 1 year or 2 year flow condition or rainfall event. There are some cases where you may need to look at a box-shaped culvert. That generally be in cases where you would have a very high flow capacity need with a low amount of bounce that's needed to handle those particular locations. One example that I would indicate would be the culvert underneath 35W on County Ditch 5362. That one, as some of you may be aware, has a rear wall on the end of the box culvert. And that was done specifically that way in order to be able to provide a large amount of capacity in general for that culvert, but also provide a very low amount of bounce even at higher flow conditions within that particular culvert. And it's worth noting there at that location that we have a dead flat grade upstream over a mile in the ditch there. And so that was part of that necessity at that particular location for that condition. Another thing to note is that lifetime cost may be high if that culvert is not the right fit for the particular application. I already noted sediment accumulation if you have too large of a culvert, and even the wrong shape. If you have a very flat bottom on the culvert, sometimes you can accumulate sediment on the corner edges of the pipe where there is a lesser amount of velocity in those corners. And we also, again, have to look at that cost of replacement of some of these culverts into the future. There are size limitations. Plastic pipe can only go up to a 5-foot diameter unless you get what they call reinforced plastic pipe. And then box culverts, they do commercially have available only a small size, a 3-foot by 6-foot size, at least the places we have talked to or looked at recently that supply concrete pipe. And even then, that's why I have an asterisk by it. A 3-foot by 6-foot box culvert is very rare. MnDOT didn't even have a sample prices for that in the last several years of their pricing tables that they have. More common would be, or more common smallest size for box culvert would be on the order of like about a 6x6 or a 6x8 box culvert. And the reason they don't have those at those sizes is that they aren't necessarily practicable for carrying smaller flows. Other thing to note is a box culvert larger than an 8-foot width, it is considered a bridge under the state design requirements, and so it does require a state certified inspection, and that has been a rationale for counties and maybe even cities to avoid using a box culvert in certain applications so that they don't have to have that added cost and effort of having a bridge inspection each year on that type of structure. Next slide. I'll just compare real quickly a few of the culvert types. If we're looking at a round culvert, particularly like a 36-inch culvert, which we could roughly consider a median size design on public drainage system culverts. We probably have a lot more that are smaller than that, but we have a number of them that are also larger than that culvert. We have listed this cross-sectional area here. It does have that variable width, and it does fit in channels as small as a 2-foot bottom width. So you do have more ability in a circular one to have go to or fit properly within areas that have narrower bottoms. They can be installed with aprons. Don't necessarily have to be installed with aprons, and they can be installed with a medium-size excavator. If you're looking at that comparison to a box culvert, that would be that minimum 3-foot by 6-foot size. It does have about double the amount of cross-sectional area. Not all that area may necessarily be used in that particular application, though. We also have, in this particular example, that if you use a 3-foot by 6-foot box culvert, it would be appropriate only in situations where you would have at least a 6-foot bottom width. So you wouldn't want to have a widening of the bottom to fit that a culvert. It does create additional scour concerns there. The box culverts have to have aprons on them. You can't install one of these without aprons, without having additional problems for scour and for safety. These aprons are very expensive, a lot more expensive than you would on a corrugated steel or plastic circular pipe. And then box culverts generally have to have either a very large excavator or a small crane. So it increases the requirements of what kind of contractor can even install them and what kind of equipment have to be mobilized to the site. Next slide. And then talking about cost, and this is just the construction cost for these type of culverts. If we use that 36-inch example, the metal and plastic pipes generally about the same size, same cost roughly. You get to a concrete pipe, they're a little bit more generally, and this kind of fits with most sizes, all the way from a 15-inch up to a even a 60-inch culvert. This kind of proportion. When you get to a box culvert, you're going to be looking at something, if you compare it to the plastic or metal pipe, that's going to be at least 3 times as costly. And that's just for this particular example. If you look at other sizes, if you look at even like a case where a capacity, you'd have a 24-inch or smaller in there, that size or that comparison is going to be even greater there. But again, this is just something to kind of give you a rough idea of how these type of structures compare in cost. Next slide. And then the uses for these polyethylene pipe, the Rice Creek Watershed District uses a lot of these for maintenance and repair projects. We tend to use them quite frequently for driveway field culverts because they have a very long life and a relatively low cost. And where the township or cities allowed it, we encourage the use of polyethylene pipes in those cases as well. Some cities and townships do require that either corrugated steel or concrete pipes be used underneath the roadways. And again, that's a choice of the road authority. Corrugated metal pipes, we sometimes use those in areas where we note that we're going to be doing burns, such as like a Brown's Preserve, or where a flotation may be an issue. A concrete pipe, a lot of cities, counties require that, and of course we use them on a lot of storm sewers. That arch pipe that I had mentioned before, those again used where the pipe cover may be limited over the top of a roadway. And then I noted on your wildlife conveyance, I actually was required one time by the DNR on a permitting situation to install an arch pipe so that the pipe had a flat bottom so Blanding's turtles could cross the roadway. I'm not sure exactly how the turtle would know enough to go through that particular flat bottom culvert, but we did that.
They know which curves go over.
Yeah. Madam President, I'm familiar with the turtle crossings. We have several of them in Washington County.
Yeah.
And they have been put in at places where determined there are turtle crossings, and to guide them to the culvert.
Yeah.
They have a long plastic fence along the very bottom of the roadway. And that culvert, then the turtle finds the fence, he can't climb over it, and so he goes along the edge until he finds the tunnel to go underneath the road.
That's
I'm not experienced as to the success rate. I don't have that.
I see a lot of dead ones on the road.
But
Chris, why don't you go ahead and finish? Let's finish this.
Right.
You have to be gone by 12:15 today, so.
Sure. And then the box culverts, those traditionally are used on higher capacity situations, particularly when you have larger streams and rivers. And again, that is common even within the Rice Creek Watershed District. I'd say that most of the The box culverts are on streams within the district, although they are used in some of the larger lower ends of the larger drainage systems such as JD2, JD3, and on 5362. And then, as I mentioned before, they are used sometimes again with that those locations with that very low bounce tolerance, again, usually in a high flow application. Next slide. So a few conclusions from this and takeaways. There are a lot of factors that go into determining these sizes, the types of culverts, the shape, material of them. And really there is no one size fits all solution. We utilize a multitude of different pipe types and sizes throughout the district in our repair projects, and the road authorities also utilize that as well. And ultimately, when we review a permit, we are looking at whether the permitted crossing, whether what they're proposing is going to maintain the capacity of the drainage system as required to have that functioning drainage system. But we do not get into the detail of describing what kind of shape or material they're needing to be using in those applications. That really becomes a decision of the owner of that pipe, which is the road authority, or in some cases, the private landowner. That flow efficiency is most important in these cases, generally in the middle of the culvert with some exceptions. And we do not recommend that the district have any sort of policy or stated preference for a specific culvert type. Because there is a need to try to fit the situation, it would not be advisable to have that policy or preference stated. Rather, we'd recommend that district staff and your use of the district engineer with providing recommendations on these on a case-by-case basis, again, because every crossing is going to be different. And I believe that's all I had, and I can address any questions, and Ashley can also address questions as well as you may have them.
The only thing I'd like to know then is we really have no legal basis at all. We can't tell a city or anybody else what size to put in or what to put in. Is that correct?
Madam President, we can tell them what kind of capacity they need to provide. Again, under the statute, they are required to not provide a crossing that's going to serve as an obstruction to flow on the system. So we can dictate that to them. What happens in the permitting process often is that the applicant may come to us and they say, well, we have this size here. What size do you need? And so we may look in the model to help provide some guidance to them on that, and then provide them a minimum size or a minimum capacity of flow that they need to provide with that culvert.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Go ahead.
So, Chris, wouldn't a bridge be the best of everything? I see you put it about the culverts out, but we have a number of bridges that are here, and not just box culverts that are considered bridges, but actual arch bridges. Isn't that the best for the flow?
Manager Waller, there are circumstances where a bridge may fit best with providing flow on the drainage system. It may not necessarily decrease the amount of maintenance that's required. In some cases, it may even increase the maintenance effort required. One example I point out is on JD3, there are a number of bridge crossings there. Usually at a bridge crossing, they're required to provide riprap along the abutments, and that riprap, particularly if it's not sized adequately, but even if it is sized adequately, it can navigate its way into the channel bottom. And traditionally, when they construct those, the bridge engineers would much prefer to be able to have the abutments and the bottom lined with riprap. And riprap collects sediment, and it's challenging for the district to maintain the sediment in the ditch if you have riprap there, and it's a continual headache. I'm sure Ashley can speak on that and has noted that in the past, but we avoid having that riprap in there. So that's one case where a bridge may actually pose a greater headache to the district rather than having a culvert. And again, I think in any case, you kind of have to look at what is the application of it.
Okay, I think we'll go.
President Pryor,
Yep.
just one thing to note, maybe a different way to look at that is ideally there would be no crossings of the public drainage system, but as areas develop, we end up, with those multiple interests to achieve independent goals, and so all the consideration that your engineer puts into it. Notably earlier on, I think it was Ashley's portion, she was noting, the crosser is a responsible party, and I'll just note, I think after we ran into a couple situations where the district exercised its authority and reused an existing culvert, and they put it down lower, and geez, you really should have extended that. And I think in those situations, we've worked with the landowner, finding that we were responsible to some degree and shared in the cost with the landowner. So really situation dependent.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. We had a new number 2. Thank you, Chris. It's good information because most of us don't know enough about culverts.
President Pryor, the new number 2 is the Solitsky update, and Terrence is on board with us for that. Staff, Terrence, myself, and Mr. Otterness did go to the site last night, so we thought to give you an update on what occurred there and how we might move forward.
Okay.
Good morning, board of managers. To further echo what Nick just mentioned, staff did go to the Solitsky property yesterday along with Houston, and we did have Houston stake out the WMC boundary on their property to kind of further visualize where that boundary ran and where it ran, and alongside some of the things that they're doing on their property. And then we also did have Houston locate the regulated floodplain and kind of help us generate a good discussion with that family. So with that said, I think we kind of left it at 3 major bullet points that staff intends to enforce in the following manner. The WMC easement is, the infringements within our easement are still remaining on the property. We recognize that the easement is there. We had a discussion with the landowners. They continued to claim that, it was not recorded on the property, or they didn't see it when they purchased the property. Staff is intending just to keep the easement on the property the way that it is. Recognize that there are those infringements, but kind of leave it at that. While investigating the property and working with landowners, we did notice some new public drainage system infringements in our public drainage easement that's also on that property. They recently, probably within the last year, did some tree plantings right along the ditch bank. And then they do have a fence that they installed to kind of contain their animals for the pasture. So we did discuss that briefly with the landowners and mentioned, the trees and the fence are subject to being moved or removed in the instance that we would have to do any kind of maintenance on the public drainage system. They acknowledged that. They essentially refused to move the fence or remove the tree plantings at this time, but acknowledged that, they would be fine with moving them or having them cut down essentially if we needed to come in there to do maintenance. And then the last point that I just wanted to briefly discuss with the regulated floodplain, as discussed in our previous board meetings and compliance hearings. I think the estimate that was provided to the board was 116 cubic yards of floodplain of fill placed in the regulated floodplain. And we worked with Houston yesterday to kind of ground truth some of that and look at those numbers and re-examine what actually was placed in the regulated floodplain on the landscape. And it was determined that approximately 100 cubic yards remains in the regulated floodplain. So in discovering that, we kind of discussed with the landowners, and they did verbally commit to submitting for a permit for that floodplain fill. As you know, the district recently changed our rules to allow the 100 cubic yards one-time deposition on a property. So I think that the thought is there that we would get a permit from them for their fill, and leave it at that. And we did, advise them that further filling activities would require mitigation. We kind of discussed at length what mitigation looks like, and just to further explain the floodplain, the regulated floodplain that we have. There was still some confusion and some discussion about FEMA, and we kind of tried to clear some of that up and give them a better understanding of what that looks like. And that's kind of where we left things.
President Kreiner, if I could add to Terrence's presentation there. In summary, I'd say regarding the district's land holdings or interest in the property that exists through the wetland management corridor easement, as well as a public drainage easement. We're playing the long game, if you will. They noted that they had some other folks that were interested in the property. It's duly recorded on the property. We've confirmed that. Next landowner certainly should be apprised of its presence and that type of thing. The current landowner was that unwilling, would not recognize the existence of the district's interest in the property, and quite obstinate about any modification of their current use. So that, and then secondly, just to add to what Terrence said, there was some discussion about wetlands on the property and the regulations that exist in regard to that. We did advise them that any work within those defined wetland areas was regulated by the state, noting both that there were exemptions and process to work through, and that they should contact us before doing anything. And I'll reiterate Terrence's point that they were advised not to fill the floodplain without further engagement of the district.
And now that's all marked, so there's no discussions to where it is.
It is. It was marked on the property for the easement with lap as it zigzags across property point to point. The floodplain was marked for its elevation, but without you need a tree load of glass in order to mark every point, but they are advised, and they seem to comprehend what we meant when we identified the elevation on the landscape in multiple locations as to this is what the district model identifies as where the waters would rise in a 100-year event.
Okay, go ahead.
Are we gonna require them to file for a permit for the fill even though it's exempt?
Terrence, you wanna handle that? I
Sure.
could answer, but I'll leave it to him.
Sure. Manager Bradley, yes, we are requiring them to file for a permit for the 100 cubic yards that they currently have filled in the regulated floodplain. And that's consistent with what we would do for, any other applicant that might want to come in. And even if they're exempt from having to mitigate on their property, they still technically require a permit for floodplain alterations.
So that does solve our record keeping problems, or what? Why do we do that?
And I'll let Patrick or Nick jump in after me, but I think I think yes. So since we do have that quote unquote exemption, we want to make sure that we're documenting that there has been fill placed in the floodplain. So if a future landowner comes in and wants to do more filling, once that property owner has already gotten the exemption, then future property owners will have to mitigate for future proposed floodplain filling or excavating.
Could we sure hop this thing by issuing a permit on our own motion?
President Reiner, I would like to have Louis respond to that. Typically, a permit is issued after the applicant represents the conditions on their property in regards to the standards.
Yeah.
I'll certainly note that we were out there and identified that, as well as we're utilizing the plan set of the permit D that engaged all these landowners to bring forth the current condition.
Simply put, I'm trying to make this the easiest way we can to make this problem solved.
Complete.
It seems to me that we know all the information. We know what they've done, we know what they can't do, and if we were to issue an order acknowledging that through a permit, we could be done with this.
President Reiner, if I could, just to add to perhaps Lewis's response, is that the board previously took an action identifying 400 and some odd dollars as the permit fee in this case because of the district's time. So I see how that plays out.
And I voted against that.
Me too.
Madam President, I didn't hear the last comment about the permit fee, but I'll just go ahead and say that our preferred posture is for an applicant to submit a permit application so that it's all understood that they are seeking to meet a district requirement. They're documenting who the landowner is and they've signed off on it. In these circumstances, I appreciate Manager Bradley's suggestion, and I guess the way I would recommend is that if the staff has already communicated with the landowner about submitting an application, and that appears to be something that is in the works and feasible and going to happen, I wouldn't impede that process. If that's not the situation, then issuing a permit of record, I think we would make some special notations on that permit about the conditions in which it was issued, but we would document the amount of fill for our file. We'd issue it to the landowner so that they would be made aware of the record. And that would be a way to dispose of the matter, I think, consistent with what Manager Bradley is suggesting. That'd be the second choice to me.
Well, should we give it a little time to see if they do come forward?
That's fine.
And if they don't, we'll just,
I just want this thing.
I get it.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah,
We've spent enough time and effort on this. We've got this reasonable solution. Let's keep it there.
okay, Nick.
President Reiner, in response to Manager Bradley is would you like to offer a time period? I don't know, mid-August, end of July, something where if they don't submit an application to the district, if
You bring it to me when you like.
It's not, yeah,
very well.
Yeah,
that's
a good
I think that's good.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. Anybody have any questions on?
Thank you, Terrence.
Yes, thank you, Terrence. And,
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
yep,
Thank you, Nick.
everybody. This stuff never goes in. Staff reports. Anybody have any comment on the staff reports today? If not, how about the July calendar? Anybody commenting on that today?
President Reiner, will note that the July calendar references Shoreview as your
Is there location?
location for your meeting. Please make note of Monday, July 12th at 6:30 PM informational meeting on 5362. Again, that is at Shoreview City Hall.
Yeah, I saw that. Administrative updates.
President Reiner, I do have a couple of quick items. CF has found that September 22nd at 1 o'clock for our city county partner meeting would be a good date. Hopefully that's far enough out that all are available.
September 22nd.
Yes. That is a Wednesday, September 22nd, usually commences at 1 PM, usually runs until about 3 or a couple hours or so.
So, pardon me, but does that interfere with Wednesday evenings for you?
No.
Okay.
Not a problem. That's
Oh, wait a minute.
Well, I didn't.
No, yeah, thank you for that.
I
No,
get it.
yeah, I understand, we've been accommodative before. I remember one time we had a manager who had put his grandson on the bus, and we changed the meeting in the morning from 9 to 9:30.
There you go.
Okay, Nick?
Yes, based on our discussion, and I noted it down on the job position, we did advertise for that technical field assistant, and we do have a candidate, but I would like to, as I said before, I'll just advise them that it's on a temporary hold. Hopefully we'll retain their attention, but yeah. We had other eligible candidates, and when that time comes, I think we could engage some of them.
Well, are you planning to have 3 positions there? If so,
Correct.
there's no reason for that whole percent.
Well, that's dependent on the medical leave issue in my mind, because currently we're advertising for the one the board just approved. We have 2 staff in the positions, 1 on medical leave, 1 acting, and then we have the 4th, which I advertised for. So what happens is I can't forecast that.
So you've got the technical person, you've got the medical leave, you've got the temporary. If you person comes out from medical leave, or we hire a different person based on what we just improved here, you're gonna keep the other 2 people.
Right,
So why can't you fill the lowest position?
because it would be 4
What's
individuals.
that for?
The position, if we advertise for the position you just approved, that would be 1. I don't know if that's a successful internal or external candidate. I have an acting public drainage inspector. I have a medical leave individual. And then I have the other position, the technical field assistant, which we advertise for. I would like to hold that lowest one. We've been doing this for over a year now and moving along nonetheless. See how that plays out, and then return to that issue once those larger prominent positions fall into place. Okay. I noted that, to the medical leave, we did receive, new information. I shared that with, Smith Partners. They will guide me, I know they're counseling with others on that, and we'll bring it back to the board. And that is all on my notes here.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Manager's update, let's go with Marcy first. How is it in Utah?
I don't think Mark.
You gone? All right, she's gone. We're gonna go. Andrew Waller.
I did, although, she left the meeting at 11:30.
Oh, okay.
So, for all of you that spent last Saturday exciting and probably missed out on watching the legislature debate the budget,
Yes.
I'll give you a little bit of a briefing for the portion that has with us. So the legislature, where the House of Representatives particularly, was in the debate over the use of clean water funding. And there was an amendment that was offered to that bill. And the amendment basically said that any money that the clean water funds were given could not be used by a watershed district that was in the process of using eminent domain. This was a large conversation about many other factors with watershed issues in addition to this. It finally came, this amendment, for a vote. I think the legislature is about 136 or 32 or someone in the House, somewhere in that area. It failed by 4 votes. That amendment to prevent clean water funds to be given to a watershed district that was using eminent domain did not pass. I just want to point that out to you. That wasn't a party line vote. There's a lot of upset people about the watersheds and how the governance is going. And there were other things. There was like one representative down in the Jackson County area was complaining about they weren't elected and they had taxing authority. And they went on and on and on. This got to be a long conversation in the afternoon. So I just bring that note to you just for informational purposes, nothing else. But 4 votes, that only failed by 4 votes.
Imagine Wayman.
Nothing.
All I have is that we did have news on our court case, and I'll have Louis go ahead and fill us in.
Madam President, managers, on Monday, the Minnesota Court of Appeals issued a decision affirming the district court in the case of Circle Pines versus Anoka County. That affirmed that President Preiner was lawfully appointed by Anoka County. The court held that Circle Pines submitting a list of 3 names of nomination did not constrain the county's choice to appoint someone from a different city that did not submit a list of 3 names. The court's analysis also paid careful attention to the distribution of the manager positions to the various hydrologic areas that are designated. That also was the position that the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts intervened as a friend of the court to support. And so I think it was based on the oral argument, I think that was the result we were expecting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Yes. Anything else? Now I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Marcy absent. Manager Waller?
Yes.
Mr. Wayman?
Yes.
Bradley?
Yep.
Yes, motion passes. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yes, thank you, Louis.